Every day, most of us will use at least one technological device. Off the job, that is most likely a mobile device. On the job, one is probably looking at a computer. But how much do you really know about your computer? Where did the mouse come from? Why is the keyboard laid out in such a funny way? Why is the screen called a monitor? Although we can point to all the parts of our computer, many of them were not invented for the computer. So let's start with the keyboard. In spite of how fun it is to say, the QWERTY keyboard was not arranged that way for kicks and giggles. To discover why, we have to go clear back to the invention of the typewriter. Although early typing instruments include a 1575 machine designed to impress letters into paper, an 1802 machine developed to allow the inventor's blind sister to write, and an 1829 machine that was slower than writing by hand, it wasn't until 1870 that any of the designs went into commercial production. This machine, known as Hanson's writing ball, continued to be used in offices into the 1900s. In 1873, the first commercially successful typewriter went into production. Made by Remington, which at the time was a sewing machine manufacturer, this typewriter both originated the term typewriter and had the QWERTY keyboard layout. Why that particular layout? At the time, typists could easily cause jams and clashes if they pushed the keys too quickly or hit letters next to each other. Several letter rearrangements later, E. Remington & Sons finally hit upon the QWERTY arrangement, which allowed typists to type faster without worrying about jams. When computers came into vogue, the arrangement was kept the same, which is why even with keyboards that don't jam, we continue to use the same layout. Of course, people have attempted to improve on the traditional keyboard with ergonomic keyboards, keyboards where you can arrange the keys to suit your own preferences, and even chording keyboards that required users to learn combinations and press them to type. This wouldn't be great for anyone who has ever struggled to learn the piano. If we're not using our keyboard to interact with our computer, we are almost certainly using our mouse. Where did that idea come from? And why is it called a mouse? To be honest, calling it a mouse today makes far more sense than calling the original invention a mouse. The wooden box bore little resemblance to the rodent other than the tail that connected the mouse to the computer. While mice were improved upon over the years, many people might remember the annoyance of lint and dust getting into the ball section of the mouse and diminishing its functionality. By 1991, the cordless mouse had been invented, but it wouldn't be until 2004 that the first laser mouse entered the market. People were quick to adopt the more precise mouse. With the advent of touchscreens, touchpads, and smartphones, many people rarely sit down at the desk to use a mouse on a computer. Without the next component, a computer would be relatively useless. Did you guess the monitor? You would be correct. But why is it called a monitor? The name originated because originally computers didn't have much of a display like we think of today. In fact, many computers had rows of lights that would turn on when a particular area was functioning. This allowed the user to monitor what was functioning within the computer. Often, the actual readable computations came in the form of hard copies rather than on a computer display. Some computers had punch cards or rolls of punchable paper tape. Once the computer had finished its processing, the machine would spit out lengths of punched tape, which an operator would feed into another machine so that the code could be translated into numbers and letters. While people began to invent primitive ways to view computer displays, these were rarely used for actual text. By the 1960s, people had begun to use teletypes to interact with their computers. These electric typewriters that used a special code were the least expensive way to interact with computers until the 1970s. Engineers in the 1960s had experimented with CRTs, but by the early to mid-1970s, video displays had taken over as the most popular way of interacting with computers. While a vast improvement over punch cards, the monitors only had the capability to display text. It would be another decade before the majority of the displays could use color either. The teletypes worked, but the expense was far outside of what most people could afford. 3 separate men realized that they could use a CCTV video monitor as a display. By 1976, video terminals were being included in certain computers. The race was on as manufacturers created video monitors specifically for computers. Over the following years, improvements were made to the computer monitors. Color, sharpness, and size have grown over the years. Some people have more than one screen. Others employ 3D glasses to improve their experience. Oddly, we have returned to the days before dedicated monitors, with computer screens and TV screens becoming largely interchangeable. While it took decades for all the individual parts of the computer as we know it today to come together, who actually invented the computer? That depends on one's point of view. While some would say that the slide rule invented by William Oughtred in 1622 was the first computer, others would select Charles Babbage as having the honor of inventing. In fact, Charles Babbage is referred to by some as the father of the computer. In 1832, Babbage created the difference engine. After his funding ran out, Babbage conceived of a better steam-powered engine called the analytical engine. He never made it, but he did leave around 5,000 pages of documentation outlining his plan. Over a century later, Babbage's invention was built and worked. A laptop it is not, as the machine weighs roughly 15 tons and is 11 feet long and 7 feet tall. So why is it called a computer? Well, before Charles Babbage's invention, there was a person who computed, as in did a lot of math. They would add, subtract, and enter results into tables, which could then be used by others to figure out whatever it was they needed to figure out. What were these people who computed called? Computers. And one can only imagine what the people who took part in the history of computers would think of the machines we have today. Ada Lovelace, who met Charles Babbage and was fascinated by his ideas, made the prediction that Babbage's mechanical computers might one day act upon other things besides numbers, and compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity. Computers have reached a level that even Ada's foresight could not have imagined. People use technology to do everything from connect with a doctor to take a college class to find their one true love. Technology continues to improve. Even today, smartphones are vastly superior to those first computers that took up entire rooms. Yet for all the vast strides that we have taken, those first steps were made by people who were willing to try something new and create the first building blocks of the computers we use today. Swan Software Solutions hopes that you've enjoyed this brief exploration of the history of computers. If you'd like to make your own mark on computer history with a custom application, we can help. Visit swansoftwaresolutions.com to schedule a free assessment.